Hilda, todos ellos directores de Casas Museo. Y que cuando yo llegué, como ya ayer hablamos que tuvimos nuestra primera junta del board, estuvimos ayer viendo lo que seguía. Cuando yo llegué a decirles que pretendíamos hacer congreso primero nacional, que fue el año pasado, y ahora el internacional, como que siempre dijeron, ¿cómo? Lourdes, ¿no? Y a 7 años estamos aquí reunidos, lo cual no puede ser más que una fiesta. Y decir también que el Comité DEMHIST, que me encanta que estén tantos aquí reunidos, porque no es fácil, de todos los países, desde Europa, de Latinoamérica, y gracias por estar acá, y además, pues nada más las gracias, sino que lo disfrutemos y que realmente sirva en estos momentos tanto para México como para todos los países y los profesionales de museos. Muchas gracias por estar acá.
Escuchemos las palabras del presidente del Comité Internacional de Residencias Históricas del Consejo Internacional de Museos, ICOM DEMHIST, señor John Barnes.
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you, Lourdes, for those warm welcomes from both of you. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words at the beginning of the conference, which is a great honor. Given the quality of the speakers, I think I'll keep my welcome brief so that you can listen to them rather than to me. But I did just want to say that there are a number of other members of the DEMHIST board here, as Lourdes has said, and we're very happy to talk to you about the work of the committee and anything else that you want to know about ICOM and DEMHIST. And I just wonder whether my fellow board members who are here would just like to stand up so that you can see who they are and that you can speak to them if you wish at breaks and intervals. So please, colleagues, would you stand? Yeah. That's great. I think this is probably the most board members that we've had at an annual conference since I was the chair. So I'm very pleased indeed that they were able to make it to this particular one in Mexico. Before I start, I just want to say a few words about house museums. They're places where lives have been lived, where events have happened and that embody evidence of our past. And they contain signposts for us today. They hold objects and artifacts in their original context, where they have the most meaning. The buildings themselves are often significant historic assets, requiring the same amount of care and attention as the objects that they contain. But most of all, they enable visitors to inhabit the same spaces as people from the past, to stand in the same places, to gaze upon the same things, to hear the same sounds, to smell and to touch, and sometimes even to feel the same emotions. We know that many of the visitors who come to our house museums like to imagine the past and even to transport themselves to another time. They can do this because house museums powerfully combine stories from the past with the places where they happened and the objects that were used at the time. Sights, sounds, smells, and stories all in one place. The past that we look after so carefully belongs to our neighbors, to our communities, and to our nations. The way that they experience and connect to it is in our hands, which is why groups like DEMHIST exist and why conferences like this take place, so that we can continuously learn how to create meaning of the precious places in our care. The theme of our conference looks at the role that house museums play as bridges to the past, revealing our roots and our influences. It asks the questions about how these legacies are chosen, encouraged, organized, and used for the benefit of society. During the conference, we'll explore the theme under 4 headings, and you'll see them set out in your program. Firstly, the benefits that legacies bring to society and their adoption by communities. Secondly, what motivates a person, social groups, or an institution to bequeath their estate? Third, what are the different forms of legal structure that give rise to the legacies of house museums? And fourth, the challenges to the significance of legacies to future generations. I want to add my thanks to the organising committee led by ICOM President and DEMHIST board member, Lourdes Mongi, for producing such a fascinating and extensive programme for us over the next 4 days. Well done, Lourdes. But I also know how much hard work and attention to detail is required to make a conference like this happen, involving, as it does, multiple institutions and individuals from around the world. I'm aware that there are many people who have been preparing for this conference for us for a long time. In addition to ICOM and DEMHIST, there are 11 institutions here in Mexico City participating to design, organize, and deliver the conference. They're recorded at the back of your program, and I want to give them our warmest thanks. I'm also delighted that so many of you have come to the conference, and I hope that you will gain from the insights of our speakers and that you'll enjoy your time here. Now, we invited the ICOM president to join us. It was worth a try. But actually, Professor Dr. Hans-Martin Hinz does wish that he could have been here with us too, and he sent a message that I'd like to read to you now. This is part of Hans-Martin's message. It is a great pleasure for me, as President of the International Council of Museums, to address you, the participants of this annual conference organized by DEMHIST on the theme of the legacy of house museums, promoting dialogue among generations. I'd like to salute DEMHIST and ICOM Mexico and the organizing committees of the conference for your commitment and collaboration to develop such a rich and topical program for the coming days. From cities to villages, house museums are a cultural landmark in both urban and rural scapes. House museums are preserved in many ways, which will be evoked on numerous occasions over the next few days. I'd like to acknowledge DEMHIST's immense dedication and energy which has helped to bring this assembly to life. Events such as this international conference are emblematic of ICOM's aspirations for greater intercultural cooperation. And I wish you all successful, enjoyable, and enlightening encounters in the coming days. Hans-Martin Hinz. So, I have great pleasure now in declaring the conference open and to invite the proceedings to begin. Thank you very much.
Invitamos al auditorio a ponerse de pie para que el señor John Vance proceda al acto inaugural de este congreso. Se invita a los asistentes a tomar un breve receso de 10 minutos para dar inicio a la jornada de este congreso. arte por la comunidad. Le damos la bienvenida a la maestra Rosana Pavoni.
Grazie. Well, sì. Dear colleagues, dear friends, carissima Lourdes, I'm honored to be here today at this DEMHIST annual conference. Since our committee was founded in 1999, a lot of time ago, DEMHIST has been working on a number of fronts. On one side, we have been working on enhancement of house museums and on communication with wider publics. On the other side, we have been working to create awareness among professionals about the identity, the uniquenesses of these places and their ability to tell stories. During our conferences, we have discussed topics of great interest that have ranged from museological reflections to museographical issues to specific focuses on... Più forte? Okay, sorry. To specific focuses on essential areas such as restoration and conservation. This year's theme, the legacy of house museums promoting dialogue among generations, opens, in my opinion, new perspectives for achievable new strategies and for new interpretations and education approaches. The multiplicity of speeches that we will hear in these days in 3 different sessions will underline the conceptual richness of this theme. The cultural value and the social impact of our house museums' heritages, and I speak, of course, of tangible and intangible heritage, are the themes that will be discussed during these works from different points of view, bearing in mind the work that DEMHIST has carried out since its foundation to support the crucial task of interpretation that each house museum can and must make of its own identity. Just to refresh our memory, this is the result of a survey carried out in 1999 during the conference of the newly born DEMHIST International Committee in St. Petersburg, a project which aimed to classify the different typologies of house museums spread all over the world. The result is the 9 typologies presented in Bogota during the annual conference in 2008. So we know that every decision a house museum comes to with regards to storytelling, restoration, educational activities, or merchandising originates from interpretation. As stated in the short presentation that DEMHIST committee published on its website, and I quote, "House museums range from castle to cottages, from all periods. The interpretation of house museums includes historic, architectural, cultural, artistic, and social information." This means that house museums are not simply related to an architectural typology or to specific collections or exclusively to celebrities, such as for years it has been argued. On the contrary, through proper interpretations of the place and its own history, house museums become mediators of cultural, artistic, architectural, and social stories. Coming back to the title of this conference, I would like to interpret the topic of this meeting, paying special attention to the dialogue between generations. Let's step back and lead back house museums to more general discussion involving all museums in the last 30 years, with interesting developments, changes, and perspectives. As Eileen Hooper Greenhill wrote in her book that has been a touchstone for museological reflections, the title is Museums: An Interpretation of a Visual Culture, and I quote, The task for communicators, or in the museum, curators, educators, and exhibition developers, is to provide experiences that invite visitors to make meaning through deploying and extending their existing interpretative strategies and repertoires, using their prior knowledge and their preferred learning styles, and testing their hypotheses against those of others, including experts. According to Hooper Greenhill, the vital questions are: how are objects and collections used by museums to construct knowledge, and how can the relationship between the museum audiences and this knowledge be understood? The museologist insists on the change that museum as an institution has been through after leaving the prevailing model of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th, which was an assertive model centered on the idea of absolute values transmitted by museum through its objects' heritage. She then sees the birth of a new museum model that she defines museum, and I quote, "While the modernist museum was and imagined as the moves as communicate, restricted, must the world, the intellect, new way of legacy. In this time, values. The very notion was associated with two main approaches. In intergenerational projects is to work with memory as an expression of people, and thus facilitating intergenerational. There is no need the common memory, particularly by preserving as it is memory, particularly by preserving the museums in their interacting with meaning, structure of located to geography, identity, and power, place a site in another opportunity for DEMHIST to launch an international survey to develop a lexicon for house museums in the three official languages of ICOM, French, English, Spanish, that could allow professionals to share not only words, but above all, ideas and contexts. But it's another topic. Okay. Coming back to the dualism house-home, although without a clear declaration of intent, DEMHIST is gradually changing its approach to the different topics with a growing attention to the idea of home. So house museum, maintaining the original definition of our museums, are becoming carriers of meanings and will ensure the conservation and development of these meanings. Thus, it will become a meeting and exchange place where the memories, weave together with daily experiences in a dialogue that will be not only diachronic, legacy handed down from one generation to another over time, but I would say, above all, synchronic, In other words, in a house museum, the intergenerational exchange, that is an exchange of knowledge or values, vision, can be easier because each party will bear his story, one richer in memories, the other more full of expectations. In this interaction, the shared heritage, not only an intangible legacy, will be expanded, and above all, it will be continually renewed, avoiding the risk of to be forgotten. Let's take an example. In our country, we all know house museums dedicated to famous people, writers, politicians, artists, collectors, characters who are familiar to us, who are obviously famous for us, but are they still famous for the younger generations? Some Italian example. Grazia Deledda, Nobel Prize for Literature in 1926. Giovanni Pascoli, great interpreter of the Italian literary decadent movement. Aurelio Saffi, Italian patriot and politician, an important figure of the Italian Risorgimento in the 19th century. Characters whose houses, since the 20s, have become museums to enhance their role of cultural and spiritual guides in the national pantheon. Nowadays, are no longer included in the compulsory school programs, that is up to the 14 years old. These house museums have lost the words to be heard by the younger generation, not to mention the visitors who come from other countries and cultures who will have even more trouble to understanding a self-referential story. So this means that the house museum has to know how to reconstruct a story and how to welcome other stories in order to take up the knowledge journey again and to support the reappropriation of cultural heritage at the risk of depletion. Definitely, it will be strategic to open house museum to interdisciplinary approaches which lead the different stories, social, economic, or gender stories, and to different journeys, weaving together reflections on space, design, behavior. Returning to example of famous people, we have to start thinking that house is not limited to the story of a single inhabitant, because the character was surrounded by a world of people and a relationship that opens to other interpretations. But this new interpretation will come to light if we set aside biographical evidence in favor of the richness of the home life. New interpretation, for example, the actors, those figures left in the shadows by an interpretation totally devoted to famous people, wives, in the case of famous men, who are the majority, women, children, servants. In other words, if we let activities, gestures, and rituals of everyday life emerge. This topic have been faced and are faced in academic and research fields among experts, and they are the core business of some museums. DEMHIST could now go a step further and make these topics become efficient instruments for educational projects, participatory projects, intergenerational projects. Therefore, the richness of everyday life will not be alien to the different generations, and it will create a common ground for an effective intergenerational dialogue. To conclude, I would like to go back to Alison Blunt. Although her reflections don't refer to Historic House Museum, we can accept her initial queries to set brand new intergenerational educative. What does home mean to you? Where, when, and why do you feel at home? To what extent does your sense of physical both shaped childhood projects haven't the same be and intangible?
La constancia de María del Carmen escenario. 48. Desde 1900, tesorera del patronato por la poesía. Ella es nuestra moderadora, la maestra María del Carmen Férez Curi.
Gracias. Gracias. Si me hace favor, Casa Mima. Y también. No está. Daniel Ronan. Salió un momentito, lo esperamos. Sí, vamos a esperar un momentito, si nos hacen favor.
Es que el programa decía que ahorita habían preguntas.
No, pero es que ya se prolongó mucho.
Pues por eso seguramente se fue hecho las preguntas para…
Tú eres la prima de Roberto.
Yo soy la prima de Roberto, exactamente.
Los voy a presentar primero a ustedes.
Perfecto.
Okay. No. Daniel, here is Daniel. Okay. Sí. Si al cruzar el umbral de una casa te invade la emoción, estás entrando a una casa poeta, a una casa museo, y yo hablo a nombre de la Casa del Poeta. Mi nombre, como ya dijeron, es María del Carmen Férez y vengo de la Fundación Casa del Poeta, que alberga el Museo de Ramón López Velarde, su última morada del poeta. Y en esta ocasión tengo muchísimo gusto de presentar a unos compañeros que también trabajan en el mismo sentido. Vamos a empezar con la Casa Mima. La Casa Mima, Patrimonio e Identidad, se encuentra en Guatemala. Esta casa es un claro ejemplo de cómo un patrimonio familiar se convierte en un patrimonio cultural de una nación. Se da a conocer a través de ella el estilo de vida guatemalteco de la época republicana. Y para hablarnos de esta casa está con nosotros Beatriz Quevedo y Roberto Andreu. Beatriz Quevedo, directora ejecutiva de Casa Mima, secretaria de la Junta Directiva y directora ejecutiva de la Fundación Cultural La Luz. Miembro del Consejo Directivo del Aporte para la Descentralización Cultural y socia fundadora de la Asociación de Museos de Guatemala y Comité ICOM Guatemala. Autora de artículos, guías y material educativo sobre museos. Traductora y editora de artículos culturales. Miembro del Consejo Editorial de la revista Galería de la Fundación G&T Continental. Roberto Andreu es máster en museografía y licenciado en Historia del Arte por el Centro de Arte Mexicano en México, Distrito Federal. Director de museografía y curador del Museo Casa Mima y miembro de la Junta Directiva de la Fundación Cultural La Luz en la ciudad de Guatemala. Investigador externo y colaborador para Fomento Cultural Banamex en la Ciudad de México. Coautor e investigador para las publicaciones del programa editorial de Casa Mima y autor de varios artículos sobre orfebrería y platería en publicaciones tanto de Guatemala como de Chiapas, México. Curador y museólogo para la creación de los museos de la Arquidiócesis de Santiago de Guatemala y de la Merced en Ciudad de Guatemala. Ambos directivos trabajan en el proyecto Casa Mima desde 1998 y son descendientes de los propietarios y habitantes de la Casa Histórica. Con ustedes, Roberto y Beatriz.
Muchas gracias. Es para Roberto y para mí un gran gusto estar aquí esta mañana y por supuesto encontrarnos con tantas caras tan conocidas y queridas a través de los años. Vamos a compartir esta ponencia. Yo daré la primera parte acompañada de un video sobre la casa, sobre Casa Mima, y Roberto continuará la ponencia con una presentación en PowerPoint. Esta es la historia de Berta Escobar de Quevedo, mi abuelita, a quien me referiré como Berta durante esta ponencia. Ella nació en la ciudad de Guatemala el 10 de noviembre de 1912 y hoy hablamos del legado de su patrimonio familiar a la historia de Guatemala. Sus padres, Ricardo Escobar Vega y Mercedes Fernández, dieron vida a ese patrimonio cuando se casaron e iniciaron su vida familiar en una casita que fue destruida por los terremotos de diciembre de 1917 y enero de 1918. Fue entonces que Ricardo compró a su padre, don José María Escobar, una casa que él había mandado construir en 1870 y llevó a su familia a vivir allí en 1920. Esta casa, a la que se trasladó a vivir la familia Escobar Fernández, es la que hoy se conoce como Casa Mima. Berta salió de esa casa para casarse en 1935 y sus padres siguieron habitándola hasta 1962, que murió Mercedes, y 1963, que murió Ricardo. Berta heredó la casa y sus bienes. Nunca la desmanteló para darla en alquilar o darle otro uso. La cuidó con todo cariño, iniciando de una forma empírica un proceso de conservación de los bienes que le habían sido legados. Teniendo su propia residencia muy cerca, la visitaba casi a diario. Por 34 años la cuidó, conservando los muebles, piezas de arte decorativo, enseres de uso diario y objetos personales de sus padres. Incluso mantuvo a las empleadas, siendo ellas quienes, bajo la dirección de Berta, limpiaron y conservaron los objetos. Berta le dio el mantenimiento necesario para que perdurara en el tiempo, incluso llegando a hacer intervenciones mayores después del terremoto de 1976. Una casa tan linda y bien cuidada merecía ser usada, y Berta, que propició siempre la unión familiar, organizaba ahí reuniones familiares, desde bautizos y primeras comuniones hasta despedidas de solteros para sus nietos. Cuando Berta enfermó y empezó a poner sus cosas en orden, la única petición que hizo a sus 6 hijos fue que no se deshicieran de la casa que ella había cuidado con tanto esmero. Cuando murió en 1997, sus herederos tenían una petición concreta, pero no sabían cómo llevarla a cabo. Mantenerla puesta no parecía muy práctico. Fue Roberto Andreu, nieto de Berta y mi primo, quien sugirió convertirla en una casa museo. Los hijos de Berta recibieron la sugerencia con agrado, ya que poner su legado al servicio de la sociedad daba un sentido a mantener la casa con sus bienes, tal como su madre lo había pedido. Inmediatamente se puso en marcha un estudio de factibilidad. Para entonces empezaba a gestarse el rescate del centro histórico de la ciudad de Guatemala, nombrándosele Patrimonio Cultural de la Nación, y la coyuntura no pudo ser más oportuna. Las autoridades de la Municipalidad de Guatemala y del Instituto de Antropología e Historia vieron con agrado un proyecto familiar que ayudaba a poner en valor el área. Entonces, la familia se reunió para hacer un plan maestro. El primer punto fue crear una figura legal para manejar las finanzas. Después de estudiar varios escenarios, se llegó a la conclusión de que la figura idónea era una fundación con orientación cultural, y así la Fundación Cultural La Luz se constituyó a mediados de 1998 y se registró el nombre de Casa Mima. Es una entidad no lucrativa y exenta de impuestos. Las donaciones pueden ser deducidas del impuesto sobre la renta. era de suma importancia definir cómo la familia mantendría la propiedad de los bienes, por lo que se firmaron contratos de usufructo tanto de la casa como de los objetos. Los estatutos de la Fundación determinan la obligación de la rendición de cuentas durante la Asamblea General Anual, la presentación y aprobación de los estados financieros y de la memoria de labores. Asimismo, indican cómo se asegura la trascendencia del proyecto. El siguiente punto del plan el siguiente punto que priorizó fue la que ella consideraba en diciembre de 1900 claros. Casa Mima se inauguró el 8 de diciembre. El se convirtieron en razón de ser la conservación del inmueble, plan para niños, juegos y estilo de vida de los bienes. No se integró la del cuarto de sonido, las técnicas, programa, y nos permite ir a congresos, seminarios y hacer todo tipo de presentaciones. No me extiendo más porque sé que Roberto quiere compartir con ustedes la riqueza que este programa nos da como museo y como personas. Un legado cultural no tiene ningún valor si no hay un público interesado en conocerlo, apreciarlo y difundirlo. Este es el gran reto de los museos del siglo XXI y este programa…
Una vez que el público tuviera interés en muestras temporales, evidente que para poder mostrar que el hecho de ser al público de una manera más nuestro libro de comentarios o adolescencia ese diálogo hacia establecer el diálogo y lo constató en una de las reuniones de contar la historia de nuestro propio espacio de área de servicio, que en el tipo de construcciones de la época de la ciudad de Guatemala se denominaban que además es apoyado folclóricas que estaban en la mejor apreciación. La idea principal del 2013, mobiliario y objeto del espacio en sí, se planteó entonces el desarrollo y comedor sociales y los relacionarse con ellos. La respuesta final está en los visitantes que se vuelven los clientes del museo, pero para realmente lograr captar su atención, la labor está en hacerlos protagonistas y que encuentren en nuestras casas museos el vehículo para mostrar sus propios legados en un diálogo de dos vías entre institución y público. Para concluir con las redes de Guatemala, en este siglo XXI, el museo debe de ser una plataforma para pensar, argumentar, aprender y proponer. Y nosotros solo agregaríamos que las casas museos además deben ser un foro para que la comunidad muestre su propio legado con orgullo. Y un poco de nostalgia no le cae mal a nadie. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a la Casa Mima por su participación y también por hacernos sentir esa parte humana que nos dan las casas museo. Muchas gracias. La granja de la familia Gili, Lisna con Irlanda, 200 años de historia. Para presentárnoslas está con nosotros Jan Terry Lovett. Ella nació en Boston, Massachusetts, de padres irlandeses que emigraron a Estados Unidos en la década de los 20. Su padre era de County Kerry y su madre de County Cork, Irlanda. Estudió en Emmanuel College en Boston, vino a México en 1969 y actualmente es directora de consultoría en Professional Learning Patterns en la Ciudad de México. Descendiente de la familia Healy por parte de madre, Terry formó parte de una genealogía tradicional del campo irlandés, propietarios por 200 años de una ancestral granja de la zona y que la familia conservó en posesión hasta fines de los 90. La ponencia de Terry es un testimonio del rescate de la casa familiar que ha sido convertida en museo.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this invitation. The purpose of my being here is to tell the story of this, thank you very much. Thank you, Martin. Is to tell the story of my mother's family from Lisnacon, Ireland. It's in County Cork, and they came from a dairy farming family, and the land was in their family for over 200 years. The purpose of this talk is to relate a kind of story that in my family in Boston, we thought that with the death of my elder, up on the screen, this is from the Irish Historical Society. Happened here. In the year 2006, my mother was one of 13 children. Most of them left Ireland because they were British citizens, and Ireland in the 20s was going to enter into a period of turmoil and rebellion against the English, and of course they were looking for independence. What happened on the farm was some of my uncles remained there, and they continued with dairy farming. On the farm, it was large at that time. It was 40 acres. It was a prosperous dairy, very rural farm. In 1975, Ireland entered the European Common Market. Because of that, there were advantages and restrictions. One of the restrictions that they applied to Ireland was the prohibition to produce and sell dairy products. That had a very damaging effect on my mother's farm because they could not sell dairy products into Europe. What happened then was that they received checks or money from the government, which was not productive for my mother's family, and of course was very depressing. They remained on the farm. They continued to do what they could. And then in 2006, my eldest uncle passed away. We in the United States were legally the inheritors of that farm, but we decided that we would give up all our rights to our cousins who lived in County Mayo. So when this uncle died, the only inheritors in Ireland were these 5 cousins. As of the year 2006, they immediately decided to sell the 40 acres. Ireland at that time was in an economic boom. It was yuppie land in Ireland. I mean, Ireland had modernized. Ireland did not want anything to do with poverty, rural life, hard the land. Pretty. I'll ever forget the meaning depression. The land, Mr. Edward Frampton saw the of the government. However, alarmed at the destruction, and there were only 7 Irish Historical Society the Lisnacon thatch cottages with these original turf ceilings are Home Depot. They are not. And this is warm in the wintertime. Husband, a lot to be done. They have the donkeys. They have set up a little area where they made original mattresses made out of hay, and they were sewn with linen, and people would sleep on them, so they're doing all of that. They are now connected with the Irish renewal of young people who are interested in Irish cooking, and they are going to set up classes to come to that farm and to show how an Irish rural family cooked an entire meal in the hearth. So here we go. Let's look at some of these lines. This is the entrance to the house today. Here is, now this is what it looked like in 1963. My brother went to the home. Were not interested in Home Depot modernizations. My mother would constantly tell them on the farm, you must modernize, and my uncles were very stubborn and used to say constantly, for what? Here is the current owner, and myself and my daughter, we went to Ireland, we found the farm. It is very remote. This is extremely difficult to find Lisnacon on the map. We had a driver, and we went, and they invited us to spend the day. These are the tiny doors into different sections of the cottage. And this is the famous roof. It's difficult to see it here. They actually had pulleys. The pulleys would go up at night, and there were sort of these how can I say, they were wooden planks, and on it were the mattresses, and the pulleys would go up, and all these wonderful little children, there were 13, would be pulled up at night and sent to sleep with their prayers and the Irish blessing, and pulled down in the morning. This is part of the original hearth, the hutch, the dishes of my grandparents. This is one of their sitting rooms, hearth. All of these pieces are original. And this is probably the backbone of an Irish farm. This was the hearth in the kitchen. This is where they made entire meals. They've traced back their initials on the iron there of the original iron makers, who they were able to find in a nearby town. The family are still making horseshoes, etc. They come in and they testified that this is an original hearth. You could see the bellows on the side. The pots are original iron, and they would make Irish bread, and from a pig farm next door, they would roast the pigs, have the potatoes, and have an entire meal while they would sit in this lovely, lovely, huge kitchen area. And so it's kind of like what Americans are doing now with the open kitchen and the eating area all together. Well, there it was 200 years ago. The hearth is still functioning. They can use it to boil the water. There I am standing in the hearth, my daughter and I, and all around it is completely the original furniture. This is one of the bedrooms. They have 3 or 4. They're being restored. They're thinking of allowing certain individuals to stay there. The mattresses are made out of hay. They're covered with flax linen sheets, and it's quite an experience. They're going to open that up next year to have a few guests stay and enjoy the farm life. They had many boxes of documents. of letters sent from my family back to Ireland, back and forth, tremendous amount of correspondence. They asked me to go through them to identify. I needed more time. This is out in the farm. Those are the milking sheds in the back. It was a very Irish day. It was raining. The wind was howling. It was quite an experience. And there's where the donkeys are. And everybody on the farm works. The donkeys are Blossom and Daisy, and they work because they take care of all the grass and eat and are playful. And they're going to have donkey carts now in the summertime for the children. And they're open every weekend for families. They charge a very small admission, but the children can come. They could go through the farm. They could see the milk sheds. They can actually have some food made on the hearth. They're going to have butter and some culinary things there. Okay, so, I don't see the, okay, this is the visit to the graveyard. My entire family is in this graveyard. You could see these are the Celtic crosses. These are my grandparents, great-grandparents. They didn't go very far from where they lived, so we went there, paid our visits. And we went to the Heritage Museum in Queenstown. This is where my mother left at 16 years of age on the ship. She was one of 3 million that left at a very short period of time. She went to the United States, docked in Boston, and she found happiness in the United States, met my father, a good caring man, and produced 12 children. I am one of 12. I'm number 10 of 12. They had success in the United States of America, and this is the genealogical family. There's the last myself. I grew up in a used to always say
Legados de fracaso en casas museo. De Estados Unidos, Daniel Ronan. Él es actualmente coordinador de vinculación social en el Museo Nacional de Vivienda Pública, con sede en Chicago, Estados Unidos. En dicha institución, Ronan también realiza distintas actividades curatoriales y de programación. Su experiencia laboral incluye, como parte de un desarrollo de pequeñas empresas, un centro para el control y la prevención de enfermedades dirigido a la comunidad latina, así como su trabajo como redactor independiente de la red de 100 ciudades resilientes, que es una iniciativa de la Fundación Rockefeller y del Fondo Nacional para la Preservación Histórica de Estados Unidos. Su blog, titulado Patrimonio Resiliente, explora diversas formas de ampliar el campo de la preservación histórica. Ronan, asimismo, dirige el grupo interdisciplinario Valentía o Agallas, en slang estadounidense, formado por líderes de políticas públicas urbanas asociados a la población lésbico, gay, bisexual, transexual, travesti, transgénero e intersexual, donde colaboran profesionales en el ámbito de los museos, las organizaciones gubernamentales y no lucrativas, las instituciones de educación superior y el sector privado. Gracias, Daniel.
Thank you, María del Carmen. Muchas gracias a todos que están aquí esta mañana o esta tarde. I rolled up my sleeves because I really want to get into this subject of legacies in house museums. So thank you so much for the invitation to speak this afternoon. So first off, I'm here to talk today about the collective legacy of the poor and working class that the National Public Housing Museum in Chicago seeks to bring to the broader consciousness. Together, the stories of both current and former public housing residents form the building blocks of our DNA. An international site of conscience, the National Public Housing Museum will open in the fall of 2017. Okay, I'm going a little fast. I got a lot to cover, though. I'm so excited. On the 80th anniversary of the Housing Act of 1937, which began the concept of public housing as we know it here in the United States. So as you can see here, this photo here is the abandoned building in which we will be building our museum, adaptively reusing it. This is called the Jane Addams Homes. It is the first public housing project in Chicago, built in 1938. And the museum will help tell the broader story of public housing in Chicago and the United States through the interpretation of 4 apartments. Let me move this over here. It's being decked out in the 4 generations of public housing residents that have lived in this building. So if we turn to the next slide. Oh. This is the rendering inside of the building. 30s, excuse me, interpreting another legacy, and that legacy being that of the public good. I believe it is important to communicate the difficulty of forming a legacy or legacies in the context of our conversation, in particular when our ideas of legacy stray from the notions of success. Americans, how many US people are here? I just want to know. Okay, cool, they're all in the middle. Hello, hi. Americans, I would say, commonly associate public housing with failure, but what can be said of its successes? And could it be perhaps that the successes of public housing merit a fresh look? Can a legacy transform? The poor and the working class, as I mentioned, the public good and public housing. I've already covered like 3 speech, so it's business. Curators and loud. Of a special opportunity stories of individuals not only form this afternoon. I wish to success and commonly referred to Virginia, George Flavel House, successful aspect is the history is the question of legacy and whether legacies, including elements of failure, should exist. There are but more questions from here. As historian Ed Goetz writes, the story of American public housing is one of quiet successes drowned out by loud failures. For those that even heard of public housing, their perceptions are shaped by crime, violence, and poverty of the projects, epitomized by the housing developments of Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis and the notorious Cabrini Green in Chicago. It's understandable why public housing is often forgotten, let alone left out of conversations around legacy making. In the River North neighborhood, the location of our museum offices in Chicago, which is actually like a 15-minute cab ride from the site that you see here up on the screen, the former Cabrini Green housing development has been wholly demolished to make way for a Target and market rate condos. These new developments, under the guise of progress and opportunity, physically cover up not only the foundations of buildings past, but also the foundations of the very ideas for which these buildings stood. Formed primarily as a jobs program during the Great Depression by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the public housing, as we know it today, came about in response to a large national housing shortage. Many hardworking Americans were shut out of the private housing market and were left to the destitution of the slums, tenements, as it were, our chapter previous in Americans' understanding of housing history. Public housing then provided them a way into the middle class and a continuation of the social contract as epitomized by New Deal programs. Applicants admitted to public housing first underwent rigorous screening processes to determine eligibility. Often viewed as housing for the poor, public housing authorities originally admitted only the working poor, requiring residents to provide proof of income and steady employment. But communicating these subtleties of public housing policies, such as its original pre-screening procedures, is really a difficult leap for many Americans who have been barraged with headlines in mass media of gruesome gang murders, stray bullets, and thousands of crushed dreams. The almost 8-decade history of public housing, I'll say, is its inception, demise, current reassessment is really a topic for another speech. I'm not a public housing historian, but what has taught me more than anything about public housing are the conversations with its past and current residents, the storytellers and ultimate carriers of its legacy. With the general public effectively left out of a legacy so demonized and separated from its chief storytellers by vicious social stigma, it comes as no surprise why defining a legacy in the case of public housing is an exercise fraught with contradiction, confusion, and controversy. But last month, walking around the former Pruitt-Igoe site in St. Louis, the housing project I mentioned earlier with our youth program at the National Public Housing Museum, I realized that building a legacy is not about flipping the script. It's about widening the lens of history to picture the whole truth. Jumping over Camille and I discuss cases such as be told. Also, the storytellers with the legacy they and legacy. I really have a building about some exhibits in the making. We address this monumental task by encouraging our diverse audiences, including public housing residents, housing practitioners, academics, and historic preservationists, to share their stories. There is nothing more effective than a story to change your perspective on a subject, and a series of stories to change your outlook on what a legacy is or what a legacy should be. One of our signature events that I help plan and organize is it really brings together the community and our audiences is Telling Belongings. Here, members of the community come together to share their cherished objects through which they tell their public housing stories and memories. By moving the chairs in a circle around the room, individuals speak to each other in the words of one of our board members about the good, the bad, and the ugly of public housing. In each storyteller's moment to speak their truth, they are emboldened to share their experiences in one of the oldest forms of human traditions. This is my personal definition of legacy. Building community through the process of listening, of healing, of learning, and ultimately growing together with one shared narrative, a compilation of countless stories. Together, we advocate for furthering the legacy of the public good, a concept I previously mentioned. But reaching further into what I call the messy business of legacy making requires us to ask yet more questions. How does our museum's primary subject shape the lens for what we stand for? How about our curatorial conversations? How are those impacted? How does the framing of the public housing legacy help or impede our ability as a house museum to communicate how this legacy may change? We find a toolbox of approaches to be more meaningful and effective than hard and fast rules. And I'm gonna change the slide. So this is actually our exhibit on display. It's a part of the Chicago Architecture Biennial, currently going on until the end of January. I'm going to speak to Collection Building Action, our recent exhibit coinciding with the inaugural Chicago Architectural Biennial, featuring objects from housing projects from across the country. From bricks, from demolished building projects, to a resident-owned coffee pot, to housing policy journals, we seek to further the breadth of our collection to better represent the scope of our ambitions, all through seemingly commonplace objects. Our collection reminds us, as a museum, about our role as a convener and curator of perspectives, a reflection of our diverse audiences. Whether we venerate objects as pieces of art or gateways to further conversations, it's critical these objects are but props in encouraging new conversations around legacy, inspired by stories and their tellers. And the more storytellers, the broader culture are bolstered by the narrative and its artists, former public housing residents, Asian Americans. We are rediscovering all the legacies that public housing built. These legacies can be woven together in different ways as distinctly as the perspectives we include through our own curation. But these narrative threads, woven into tapestries of legacy, can do little to help us guide the conversation around action. What is next? What is the direction of an institution that wishes to impress upon the public a much wider and broader picture of the truth? an institution that tells a story of itself, but also opens itself up to telling even more stories. This is where we continue to shape our legacy, not just by recounting our subject matter, but also by recasting it for today's conversations. We believe public housing can inform dialogues about affordable housing development, police and criminal justice reform, as well as healthcare. The limit to legacy is not the subject matter, but how an institution's story is formulated, told, contextualized, and later retold. So how can we shape future legacies? Taking public housing as our primary example of legacy, it is my firm belief that if we shy from the full picture of public housing history, capitulating to the common understanding of what public housing presumably is, we fail to acknowledge the quiet successes and succumb to the loud failures and ignorance to dictate our legacy. We need primary accounts, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to substantiate our legacy. As a museum community, let's altering public perception. Us open to the why this is documented failure, liberalism, identity. Like all of life, we do not as we got there, and quite honest if this were the case. Our humanity rests on staying connected to a reality which keeps our successes and failures in context. We arrive at more meaningful and interpreted legacies when we value life as lived rather than life as idealized. Of success, we strengthen our resolve as institutions to inform and inspire action tempered by a clear picture of the truth. For the National Public Housing Museum, exploring and interpreting failure and success are essential elements to legacy that in turn inform future public policy. With this, we have our so what, a purposeful call to action to an audience that can actually listen. But we want to do more. We would like to know how other house museums are tackling the question of legacy in their work. How can we work together to effectively address the barriers to our own legacy, making, altering, and breaking? The muddle of failure and success can wreak havoc on legacy making. It's indeed a really messy business. And I hope my remarks today can serve to push forward this conversation, murky as it may seem, by asking questions about legacy and addressing others we may have even yet to ask. In the spirit of dialogue, I look forward to start what I imagine will be a conversation on legacy making and creating our own legacy together in a spirited fashion. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias a nuestros participantes por ayudarnos a entender un poco qué motiva a una persona, grupo social o institución a legar su patrimonio. Y ahora pasamos a una breve sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Por favor, si alguien tiene alguna pregunta para nuestros participantes o algún comentario.
Bueno, en primer lugar, ¿por qué Casa Mima? No sé si lo dijeron o me lo perdí. ¿Por qué Casa Mima? Y en segundo lugar, ¿cuál es el perfil? Bueno, constituyeron como el grupo de trabajo de los familiares, de los descendientes de la dueña de la casa, pero más o menos si nos pueden platicar un poco el perfil de cada uno, como el perfil académico o profesional que tenían y cómo se organizaron para armar este plan de trabajo y de lo que nos platicaron.
Bueno, la pregunta tiene dos partes. La primera, ¿por qué se llama Casa Mima? ¿Le entiendo que es correcto? Sí. Casa Mima quiere decir Casa Museo Internacional de Movimientos Artísticos. Sin embargo, fue un nombre buscado para que dijera Casa Mima, porque, a nuestra abuela Berta le decíamos Mima, y ella fue la que tuvo la visión de guardar los objetos de sus padres, de pedir que se guardara la casa, y entonces pues en honor a ella, porque sin quererlo ella empezó un proceso de conservación importante que es el que ahora nos permite tener una casa abierta al público.
¿Me podrías repetir, perdón, la segunda parte de la pregunta, porque no la terminé de entender? Ok, perdón, voy a tener que hablar en primera persona porque me atañe un poco personalmente a mí. Yo vivía en México al momento que mi abuela muere y había terminado la carrera en Historia del Arte y había hecho la maestría en Museología. Cuando nos viene este proyecto encima, mi abuela, que hereda esta propiedad a sus hijos, mi mamá, mi tío y a mis demás tíos, deja esta idea del proyecto, pero sin un fin específico. Entonces, de alguna manera yo, que estaba relacionado con las artes y los museos, pues como que todos me voltearon a ver a mí y así como que ¿qué hacemos con el proyecto? Y yo, que tenía esa formación, fui el que propuso que se hiciera el proyecto. Yo busqué específicamente a Beatriz porque en ese momento era de las herederas de Berta, de Mima, de la señora de la casa, la que había tenido contacto con instituciones culturales y en ese momento estaba libre. Así que le propuse que trabajáramos. La idea ha sido desde un principio que la familia se integre, pero cada quien, hoy la relación profesional, perdón. Diseñadora gráfica para realizar nuestros folletos y nuestras cédulas. Tratamos que de alguna manera la familia se integre y se entusiasme con este proyecto, cada uno desde el punto de vista profesional que maneja.
Gracias, Roberto. ¿Alguna pregunta más? Sí, cómo no. Por favor.
Hello, thank you for the great talks. I have a question for Roberto, Beatriz, and Daniel. You all spoke about having programs that dealt with the public and public input and how they help to shape the legacies that you're telling through your stories. So I was wondering what kind of follow-up you have for the public that you have engaged in your programming.
So that's a great question, thank you. So a lot of what we do at the museum is the Telling Belongings event is very much like a show and tell. So what we'd like to do is obviously host more than one of those. So we're working to make that an annual tradition. So kind of looping in a captive audience, I think, is partially what we intend to do. And also inviting those individuals that participated in that program to additional events. But also we are a collecting institution, so we do very much value when people bring objects that could really help tell our broader story of public housing. So it is our hope that with that program and its growth that we could actually work to make it a program that can help us build our collection. Okay, I guess you know.
Como Roberto les contaba, I don't know if I should answer in English, what should I do?
It's okay, in Spanish.
Okay. Como Roberto nos contaba, las convocatorias que nosotros sacamos anualmente para nuestras exposiciones que son comunitarias han tenido una gran respuesta. Yo creo que esa es la mejor manera de saber, de ver cómo ha sido, pues otra vez dice, usando la palabra respuesta, ¿verdad? La respuesta del público es ver cómo nos llevan sus objetos a casa misma y cómo ellos desean ser parte de nuestras exposiciones temporales. Por otro lado, el manejo de los medios también nos ayuda a ver cómo estamos con el público a través de Facebook, Twitter, nuestra página web, pues sabemos, ¿verdad?, qué tanto nuestro público está en contacto con nosotros.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos oportunidad de una pregunta más. ¿Una más? Perfecto.
This is a question for Daniel. I'm wondering, I sense some resonance in your potential programming with the Lower East Side Tenement Museum in New York City, where they interpret the decades of various uses of the tenement house, and I just wondered if you have studied that as a model and have some idea of how that might be useful in your interpretation of the coming museum.
Yes, in fact. So Ruth Abram is actually one of the founders of the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, which seeks to cover the tenement house experience in the late 20th century and early 21st century. What we see ourselves as sort of that next chapter, I think I alluded to in my remarks of housing history in the United States. Before it was very much privately run and there wasn't a lot of regulation. And so we do look to the Lower East Side Tenement Museum as somewhat of a model. I think when you look at our building now, it's sort of an abandoned hulk of a building that we wish to turn into our museum. And some have commented that, you know, why don't you kind of just keep it that way and sort of interpret it in that same ethos by which the Lower East Side Tenement Museum has done the same. And my response to that is really, I mean, that's not the point so much of public housing. I mean, public housing, at the time it was built in 1938, the Jane Addams homes, the building that you saw is actually the last of 32 on the near west side of Chicago. They were state of the art. The residents that moved in for the first time had running water. I mean, this was very much an improvement. So to really emphasize, I think, the advancement of housing, particularly for the poor and working poor in America, is the stronger narrative that I think should be pushed to the forefront, rather than this, I think this new concept of ruin porn. I don't know, like people venerating the past, but not so much reflecting upon it and how it actually was.
Thank you, Daniel. Bueno, y ahora procedemos a entregar las constancias.
Muchas gracias. La maestra María del Carmen Férez Curi procede a la entrega de constancias de participación a los conferencistas de esta mesa, Beatriz Quevedo y Roberto Andreu, a Terry Lovett Haley y Daniel Ronan. Y en especial agradecemos la valiosa participación de la moderadora en esta primera parte del eje temático, a la licenciada María del Carmen Férez Curi. Le pedimos a la maestra Lourdes Monjes tenga a bien entregar el reconocimiento de constancia de participación a la licenciada María del Carmen Férez Curi.
Ay, mi querida hermanita.
Bueno, ¿ya no hay más fotos o sí?
Les agradeceremos a nuestros ponentes permanecer ahí en escenario, ya que están en estos momentos recibiendo las tomas de impresión, las fotografías del recuerdo. Señoras y señores, invitamos a todo nuestro público a pasar al patio anexo para el almuerzo y como opción pueden ustedes visitar en la planta alta la colección de arte del Museo Casa del Risco, agradeciendo en grupo de 20 personas, así como la invitación de visitar nuestra librería tienda en la planta baja. Los informes para sus viajes y visitas estarán en el edificio anexo por si tiene algún trámite que realizar o viaje post-congreso. Gracias, buen provecho. Regresaremos a las 2 de la tarde con 10 minutos.
Otra más. Gracias. Gracias, muchachos. Qué pena.
Yes.